All right, so let's go ahead and get started on the review. This is this Unit 6 review. The test will be on Wednesday, and this is what the first half of that test is going to look like. Okay, here we go. First one, they asked us to write a square root equation that best describes the following table. Now, usually what happens is when we go to our calculator, we can go to Stat, Edit, put the table in, and then do a regression. We've done it with linear functions. We've done it with quadratic functions. Unfortunately, in our calculator, we don't have a square root regression. So we're going to have to kind of play around with some things here. All right, first thing I want you to notice is that we have an error next to 3. We have an error next to 4. And then after that, we're okay. So what we need to do is find the equation that would give us this exact table here. So first of all, the equation has y equals. So the very least you guys should be able to do is write y equals. Now, I even told you that it was a square root equation. So you know there's going to be a square root in the problem. Now you'll notice here there's an error on the 3 and the 4. And the only way we get an error is when we have a negative number underneath the square root. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Underneath the square root, I'm going to put x minus 5. Now why did I choose to start with 5? Why minus 5? Well, because if you look here, you'll notice that I no longer have an error once I get to that 5. Notice what happens when I put this 4 in for x. What do you get when you do 4 minus 5? 4 minus 5 is a negative 1. And what happens when you try and take the square root of a negative 1? You get a error. Look what happens when you put in a 3 for the x. You do 3 minus 5. 3 minus 5 is a negative 2. And what happens when you try and take the square root of a negative 2? You get a error. So that's why I chose the square root of x minus 5. By the way, notice when I plug in a 5 here, what's 5 minus 5? 0. And what's the square root of 0? 0. Square root of 0 is 0. Notice there's no longer any error. However, is this the equation I'm looking for? Well, let's go a little dig a little deeper here, and let's go to our calculators and ask for a little help. Go to y equals 1, and type in the square root of x minus 5. Because right now, this is my guess. I don't know that I'm right or wrong yet, but I'm going to go to my calculator and check it out. So now that you've got that typed in your calculator, I want you to look in your table, second graph. And I want you to see if the table on your calculator matches up with exactly what you see here. No, doesn't match up exactly. Do you see an error next to 3? Do you see an error next to 4? Yes. But do you see a negative 1 next to the 5? No. No. What do you see? 0. You see a 0. And that's not what our table says. Ours says a negative 1. So here's what we're going to do. In order to get from that 0 to this negative 1 right here, what I'm going to have to do is take away 1 from this square root of x minus 5. So let's try that again. Let's type in our new equation. Let's do square root of x minus 5 minus 1. Let's see what we get this time. Remember, it's got to match up exactly with the table that we have here. Is it matching up exactly? Are all these numbers in your table on your calculator? Yes. So now that we have that, we have our final equation. So unfortunately, there's no short, fast, easy way like with our linear and quadratic. We're going to have to kind of play around with it. Later on, we'll talk more about how to come up with the equation a little more in detail. Right now, we're just kind of playing around. Okay, so that was number 1. That's a little tricky there, guys. Number 2, now this one should have been straightforward. All you were asked to do was graph y equals the square root of x plus 4 minus 2. Now, all you had to do is go to your calculator, graph it, and what you see on your calculator, transfer it onto here. Now, I can tell you that the end point of this is at negative 4, negative 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 2. Remember, we talked about transformations. We know this graph is going to be moved to the left 4 and down 2. So the graph you should have should look something like this right here. And again, all you have to do is put that in your calculator graph. I am going to be checking for the endpoint, guys. If that endpoint is not in the right spot, it will be counted wrong. So be really, really careful on that endpoint. Negative 4, negative 2. Let's go to number 3. Number 3, you were asked to find the domain of this function. They want to know what are all the x values in this particular equation. Again, a couple of different ways to come up with the answer here. One way is to graph it. So everybody go to your calculator and let's graph this. What does y equals 4 square root of x plus 5 minus 2 look like? Get it in your calculator. Let me sketch what we see. Alright, let me borrow somebody's calculator, see what you got. Alright. So the graph you're getting looks something like this right here. So what I want to know are what are the x values for this graph? Well, there's lots of x values. Where do the x values start at? They start right here. What is that x value over here? Where's it starting? Close, not positive 5, but negative 5. The x values start at negative 5. And notice how it's curving out to the right. So these x values, yeah, they're starting at negative 5, but are those x values getting bigger or smaller than negative 5? Bigger. They're getting larger. Larger than or greater than or equal to that negative 5. So the answer I'm looking for here on number 3 is the domain is x is greater than or equal to a negative 5. And we can tell that by looking at the graph. Now there is another way you can tell the domain. Anybody remember what we said about the number underneath the square root? What kind of number does it have to be? What's that? Positive. This number underneath the square root always has to be a positive number. So let me show you another way that you can come up with the same exact answer, just in case you're having trouble finding or looking at the graph. If I take what's underneath the square root, which in our case is the x plus 5, and since I know that thing right there has to be a positive number, I can set it greater than or equal to 0. So that's what that's saying. Has to be a positive number. Look what happens when I solve this thing for x. Subtract 5. And notice the answer I get here is the same thing that we found earlier over here. Okay, so you can do this algebraically, or you can also look at the graph. I know some of you are asking, is it always going to be greater than or equal to 0? Yes, because we always want to make sure that it's a positive value. All right, so that takes care of number 3. Now let's go to number 4. Number 4 here, it says when solving the problem, the square root of x is equal to negative 7. Sam squared both sides and got 49 for his answer. The question is this correct? Why or why not? All right, so here's what he did. This was the equation. He came over here and squared both sides. Square root of x squared is x. The square root of a negative 7 is a 49. So he said the answer was 49. Is this the correct answer? Is this right? It looks right. We did the work. But guys, remember when we did this on Friday, I said after you get your answer, what are you supposed to do after you get your answer? No. The notes that we took on Friday. We worked the problem out, and then after I worked the problem out, I did an extra step. Plug it in. You got to check your solution. You got to plug it in. Okay? So, we said the answer was 49. But look what happens when I check it. If I replace the x with a 49, what's the square root of 49? 7. 7 the same thing as a negative 7? No, 7 is not the same thing as negative 7. So this 49 that we got over here is incorrect. It doesn't work when you check it. It doesn't work when you plug it back in. So in this particular case, number 4 has no solution. So unfortunately, he was wrong. Okay? And the reason he was wrong is because the square root of 49 is 7, not a negative 7. So when you're working with these square root equations, you must check your solutions. You've got to go back and plug them in. Because sometimes they don't work out. Okay, number 5. They asked us to solve this equation, which is pretty much like the assignment that I gave you on Friday. I want to know what's the solution to this equation here. So here's what we did on Friday. We said, first of all, we're going to make sure there's nothing outside of the square root, which it looks like we're okay here. Once you've done that, then you can square both sides. And the reason we're squaring both sides is so that we can get rid of this square roots. So the square root of this thing squared is just the negative 3x plus 6. That's no big deal. What's a little trickier is squaring the x plus 4. What we did is we went out to the side and multiplied x plus 4 times x plus 4. And the way we did that is using some 4. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to do some 4. X times x is x squared. X times 4 is 4x. 4 times x is 4x. And 4 times 4 is 16. That's 4. Notice that I can simplify even further. These two terms right here in the middle, they are like terms, so I can put them together, which means I'm going to end up with x squared plus 8x plus 16. So I now have squared both sides. Now the first thing that you should be looking at is that x squared. That x squared tells us that we have a quadratic equation. And how many solutions do we have in a quadratic equation? 2. So how do you find those 2 solutions? There's 3 different ways. Samantha, can you tell me one way to find the solution to a quadratic? What's one method we have? There were 3 different ways I showed you can find the solution. Y'all guys help her out. What's one method? Graphing, that's one way. Okay, that's factoring. That's right, bottoms up, which is factoring. And quadratic formula. There it is. Those are the 3 methods we have. Graphing, quadratic formula, and factoring. Out of those 3, what should I say was the easiest of those 3? Graphing. It doesn't always work, but if you can get away with graphing, that's the method that I would choose. But what does it have to be equal to first? 0. So let's go ahead and get this thing equal to 0 first. I'm going to take these 3 x's and I'm going to move them to the other side. Matter of fact, what I'm going to do is add them to the 8x. So that 8x plus the 3 x's would give me 11x. If I take this 6 over here and subtract it, 16 minus the 6 would leave me with a 10. Alright, so now I've got this thing equal to a 0. Now I'm ready to graph it and find the 2 solutions. So go ahead and graph that for me, and let's find the 2 solutions. By the way, when you're graphing this, what we're looking for are the solutions, and you can find those solutions by looking for the x-intercepts. I'm looking for the x-intercepts. What do we get for those x-intercepts? -1, -10. That is correct. -1 and -10. That means the answer to number 5 should be -1 and -10. Is that right? Why not? What else we got to do? Yeah, don't forget, guys, we got to plug it in. Those answers you're getting, got to check it. Because we may find out that one of them doesn't work. We may find out that neither one of them works. So make sure you check it. I'm going to check the -1 first. All I'm doing is replacing the x with a -1 to see if this left side equals the right side. I know -1 plus 4 is 3. That's no big deal. This, I'm going to put in my calculator. The square root of -3 times -1 plus 6. Put that in your calculator, see what value you get. Square root of -3 times -1 plus 6. What number do we end up with? You get 3? Positive 3? Yes, sir. All right, so that looks okay. When I plugged in -1, the left side equals the right side, which means this -1 is a solution. But what about the -10? Is it a solution? Well, let's do the same thing. Let's plug it in. Let's see what happens here. Notice all I'm doing is the same thing. Replacing the x with a -10. -10 plus 4 is a -6. Let's see what we get over here. The square root of -3 times -10 plus 6. 6? Positive 6 or -6? Positive 6. So the question is -6 the same thing as a positive 6? No, that is not true. So if that's not true, then this -10 right here cannot be part of our solution. So the answer to number 5 is just the negative 1, not the 10, not the negative 10, just the negative 1. So we need to be real careful on that test. Make sure you're only putting a negative 1. If you put that negative 10, I'm going to think you assume that that's also part of your answer, and it's not. I'm going to have to count it wrong. All right, we got one more to look at, number 6. Number 6, we're given the equation square root of x minus 5 is equal to the square root of x minus 1. Now, this right here, guys, was actually your challenge problem on your homework from Friday. And if we try and do that by hand, it is possible. We could take both sides and square it. The problem is when you try and square the left-hand side of the, not the left hand, but the right side of the equation, it can get a little tricky here. So there is a shortcut that we can take to find the solution, and that's by graphing. So I haven't shown you this yet, so let me go ahead and show you now, just in case we need it. Everybody go to y equals on your calculator. And what I want you to do is in y1, I want you to type in the left side of the equation, which is the square root of x minus 5. Just the left side. When you get done typing that in, I want you to go down right below it, and in y2, I want you to type in the right side of the equation, which is the square root of x minus 1. Make sure your minus 1 is on the outside. Minus 1 is on the outside. All right, now you got them both in your y. What we're going to do is we're going to graph those two equations. So go ahead and hit graph. And of course, what you're going to see is you're going to see two square root functions. And these two square root functions are going to end up intersecting or crossing each other. What we're going to do is we're going to find that point where they intersect at. So that right there would give us our solution. So let me help you out here. You got your two graphs. Now we got to do is tell the calculator to find where they intersect. So we're going to go to second trace. Number 5, we've been here before. Number 5, intersect. And what we're going to have to do is hit enter 3 times to find that point of intersection. Now we had a little trouble earlier, so if you're having trouble, try and get the little blinking cursor as close to that point of intersection as possible. We did have a little trouble earlier. So do second trace, number 5, intersect. Move your little cursor as close to that point of intersection as possible, and then try to hit enter 3 times. And if everything works out, down at the bottom of your screen, it should say intersect, and of course it's going to give you 2 numbers. It's going to give you a number for x and a value for y. What are those 2 numbers?
I got 9 for x and 2 for y.
There you go, 9 and 2. That's the point of intersection. They cross at the 9, 2. That's the order pair they cross. Of course, I don't need both of those numbers. I was solving for x. So the x for the solution to this equation is 9. Or is it? What do I have to do to make sure that 9 is the answer? Check it. And how do we check it? By plugging it in. So just real quick, let's check it. Let's put the 9 in for x. Just make sure that the left side equals the right side. So over here, 9 minus 5. 9 minus 5 is 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. Over on the right, the square root of 9 is 3, and 3 minus 1 is 2. So it looks good. Left side equals the right side, so this solution that I have here, nothing wrong. That is the answer to number 6. All right, so we'll look at the rest tomorrow.